The Olympians swept away Shongnam in an instant and slowly narrowed the siege around Gongpildu's fortress. Isn't this stage too small for us to come forward? The constellations thought it was disgraceful. It was natural. There were no constellations who could build up anything from this scenario. Amidst these unmotivated constellations, a constellation wearing a crown and holding an ancient spear and shield spoke. Stop complaining. Once this is over, Father will suggest our promotion to the 12 gods. Oedipus, really? The expressions of the constellations changed due to the words of the Blind King's heir. Promotion in the nebula meant their stakes in giant stories were increased. Heh, can we reach 1 decimal place? The stakes in a giant story were one of the measures of a constellation's strength. More stakes meant more probability, which was a source of escaping from the constraints of many scenarios. Let's finish it and go back. The constellations finally started to advance to the armed fortress. It happened the moment their star relics were shining. The sky was covered by a dark dome, and the light disappeared from it. The great gray constellations approached the armed fortress, stopped at the appalling darkness. What? The lights in the area were turned off by the clouds that came. It wasn't just this area. The darkness covered the entire Korean peninsula. Even the sparks of probability were covered by the deep darkness. The Blind King's heir stared up at the sky with bewildered eyes. Is it the Queen of the Underworld? The only nebula that could descend to the Korean peninsula today was Olympus. In addition, there were a few constellations of Olympus who could use such a large amount of probability. One of the constellations emitted a faint light to reveal the surroundings, but it quickly disappeared. It was like a black hole that sucked out all the life. The anxious constellation shouted, Your Majesty! If you've come, then please say it! One of the constellations suddenly gave a warning. Something's coming! A dark object was fired from the sky and pierced the chest of one constellation. It was an object like a dragon's claw. The confused constellation coughed up blood and tried to pull out the claw, but the claw grew increasingly larger and soon burst through the constellation's body. The constellation let out a sound before becoming part of the darkness. The frightened constellation screamed, They heard the sound but couldn't avoid it. It meant this existence had a completely different status from them. The Queen of the Underworld wasn't this much. Run away. The Blind King's heir discovered the situation and ordered a retreat. Then an enormous amount of sparks burst from the armed fortress. The intense light that the darkness couldn't swallow revealed the open door of the fortress leading to this dark city. There was a woman with a small body. The first one to discover her was the Blind King's heir, who trembled. Why are you... The shadows of the black flames were swirling around her body. The face of a little boy with red eyes underneath black hair flashed. The boy with one arm bandaged raised his hand, and the shadow of a dragon covered the sky. White fangs were bared. As the boy laughed, the darkness of the world breathed. Then the massacre began. King Oedipus couldn't hide his astonishment as he stared at the scene on the screen. The constellation Blind King's heir has been removed from the scenario. The constellation Thebes' gatekeeper has been removed from the scenario. The shadow of a dragon was tearing up the flame constellations on the screen. Fortunately, Han Soo-young wasn't too late. The constellation Abyssal Black Flame Dragon is letting out wild laughter. Han Soo-young had a bandage around one arm and half her face was covered as she burst out laughing. She really was a match for the Black Flame Dragon. She acted so well that I didn't know why she hated it so far. King Oedipus stared at me and exclaimed, How come? Why is a candidate of the apocalypse? Candidate of the apocalypse? Well, King Oedipus would have that type of information. The Abyssal Black Flame Dragon was one of the candidates of the apocalypse. Many constellations are astonished by your scheme. The constellation Dragon Lying Down is nodding. The constellation Secretive Plotter is feeling pure admiration. You have acquired a new story. The story Kill with a Borrowed Knife has been acquired. I watched Gyeonggi-do, covered in darkness, and licked my lips. Attracting the Abyssal Black Flame Dragon was a last resort. It could have brought about a bigger disaster. However, there was Han Soo-young in the promise made with the Black Dragon. Thus, he wouldn't destroy the Korean peninsula. King Oedipus bowed his head and let out an unknown groan. We saw the unusual appearance, and Yu Jung-hyuk and I raised our swords at the same time. Ew. King Oedipus's son was among the constellations who suffered under the Black Flame Dragon. There was the possibility that the enraged Oedipus wouldn't be able to control his emotions. I will kill you! As expected, the constellations who survived with Oedipus released their status at the same time. I had a giant story, but it wasn't enough power. The moment I was about to trigger electrification, something rose from the ground and caught Oedipus's neck. The huge Surya moved one of his 4 arms and held onto Oedipus's neck. King Oedipus stared at Surya with surprise. Why? Stop it. Surya's heavy status pressed down on the other constellation. Don't look so ugly anymore. I won't listen to the words of a dog who lost the fight. It can't end like this. The next moment, King Oedipus's body exploded. The brutally exploded body scattered into ashes in front of Surya's eyes. The movements of the constellation stiffened as they nervously stepped back. Despite the severe injury, Surya still had the power to stand up alone. It was a phenomenal vitality. I quickly calculated the power of my remaining companions. If we hit Surya right now, it is our defeat. For a moment, I thought I heard wrong. However, the words had definitely emerged from Surya's mouth. I bit my lips as joy boiled from deep inside my heart. The great Lokapala had admitted defeat. The winner of the Demon King selection has been determined. There were screams from afar as the ensuing system messages came. They were the screams of the dukes defeated in the Demon King selection. One by one, the bodies of the constellations staring at us scattered. The scenario ended, and the star stream started to recall the probability that they were allowed. Surya's body was also disappearing. I opened my mouth before Surya's body completely disappeared. I wanted to ask, why did he suddenly change his mind? The Demon King of Salvation. However, I shut my mouth the moment I saw Surya's eyes. In retrospect, Surya wasn't an ordinary constellation. He was one of the great Lokapala. It was rather strange that such a constellation would use cowardly tricks against us. Perhaps this selection had dealt a significant blow to his reputation and pride. Surya blinked slowly and asked, "Did you get the qualification of the end?" "I'll probably get it, and you also." Surya's eyes shone terribly, as if he was dismissing the trivial comfort. "I will watch your story." Surya would also get the qualification of the end one day. Then the day would come when we would meet again. It wasn't here, but in the later scenarios of the star stream. And in a short moment, Surya's gaze turned towards the fragments of the destroyed train. They were fragments of the car, while Surya and I faced each other. However, the appearance of some fragments was a bit strange. They weren't broken from the battle with me. They were scars carved on the train from before. "I know." "That's right. You understand." Surya finally disappeared with these words. The pressure on the surroundings vanished, and a curious silence took its place. I didn't feel it was real. I calmly practiced what I had planned, and was lucky with several things. Then I came all this way. The 25th main scenario has ended. I turned my head and saw Yu Jung-hyuk watching Surya's disappearance. The main scenario Demon King selection has been cleared. The rewards for the selection are being prepared. A new Demon King has appeared in the demon world. You have become the master of the 73rd Demon Realm. There was the explosive system message, and Yu Jung-hyuk and I simultaneously looked up at the sky. The gazes of countless beings poured towards me from the sky. The Demon King, ruler of the East Hell, is looking at you. The Demon King, devil of principles, is curious about you. The Demon King, black mane lion, is inviting you to his demon realm. The constellation, mass production maker, is sending his congratulations. The constellation, Queen of the Darkest Spring, has sent you a gift. The constellation God of Wine and Ecstasy is proposing a toast. The constellation Prisoner of the Golden Headband is greatly pleased. The constellation Commander of the Red Cosmos is very wary of you. It was an incomparable amount of attention. There were strong people similar to me, to distant beings who I couldn't even look at their toes. There was a pause, and then Jang Hyung's voice was heard. "It's over." I nodded and looked around. Lee Hyung-sung carried Jung Hee-won while watching the sky. Lee Ji-hee supported the injured Yu Sang-ah and waved at me, while Shin Yu-sung held onto my sleeve and looked up at me. The Breaking the Sky Master held the small Osu in her mouth and barked lightly. Han Myung-oh held Asmodeus' incarnation body in his arms and let out a weary breath. On the rocky hill not far away, I could see the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint and Kyrgios. The injured brash swamp predator was curled up, and Chok Jong-yong was sitting on his back. It was an ordeal that couldn't be overcome without any of them. Your nebula is well known in the star stream. A large number of constellations remember the nebula Kim Dokja's company, temporary. Yu Jung-hyuk heard the message and frowned. The name needs to be changed. I smiled at the guy who had his pride in a strange place. It wouldn't be bad to brainstorm names for the nebula sooner or later. It felt that the darkness was retreating from the sky. I could breathe for a moment from the seemingly endless trials. Your first giant story is fully blooming. The giant story Demon World Spring has been acquired. Citizens started emerging from the ruined industrial complex. People were intoxicated by the unbelievable victory. Some people shouted while others called out mine and Eugene Hyuk's names. I could also see Eileen and Mark. The Starstream is satisfied with your giant story. You have earned the qualification of the end. Finally, there were the messages I had been waiting for. The hidden scenario, a single story has begun. Your legendary stories have formed an opening act. The initial portion of your first giant story has been completed. After a long period of enduring, the first footsteps towards the final scenario were taken. You have been given the authority of the filtering is turned off. It was the moment when the information of the last chapter, which had been covered with a veil, finally appeared in front of my eyes.